Welcome. I'm Beth Schaefer. I'm the director of the Institute for Professional Development here at Metropolitan State University. We are the non-credit workshop professional development arm of the college. It supports our credit-based programming at the university. And we focus on providing professional development training workshops and opportunities to businesses, organizations, public sector entities. So if you have needs, you can reach out to us. We do focus on business transformation, public sector supervision, DEI, and leadership topics, but we have lots of university departments and lots of university expertise. So we encourage you to reach out for anything. I'll say this a couple of times, but just so you know, we are recording today's session. The chat is available for you to use. Do know that the chat I think we try to edit it out, but everybody else on the webinar today will be able to see who you are. We also have opened the Q&A option. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a Q&A icon. You can enter questions in the Q&A or comments in the Q&A, participate through Q&A, and the only people who see that are myself and Christine. So that keeps you more anonymous if that's helpful to you. Christine will I'll watch the Q&A to interrupt at appropriate times to get your questions interjected. And Christine is happy to take those as we go along, but she will also have a chance for Q&A at the end of the webinar today. So Christine Moore. Christine is our facilitator today. She comes at the start of her career from an IT background, but she has a fabulous knowledge of all things leadership, project management, facilitation, change. So we really enjoy using her as an instructor at IPD. We've been working together for 15 years or so now. She fits our style of training, which is adult learners bring a lot of experience to the table, and we want you to discover what you know, what you don't know, and maybe what you know but didn't know you knew. And she's great at being a guide on the side to draw out that information from you. Today's topic, the change transition, it's a human thing. Christine will talk more about change and where it comes from. I always find it fascinating because you do meet people who say, like, I don't really do change. And I kind of chuckle because I'm like, you do change. I mean, you may not manage change, but you're doing change. And because it's a human thing. And one of the big changes we're all facing now is AI. And I think about AI, especially in relation to the workplace and the job changes that are coming. And I think if you want to be safe in your job, learn how to manage change, because I really feel like although AI may be able to spit facts at you, managing change, because it's a human thing, it needs a person, a human being behind it who can understand other human beings and talk to other human beings and make sure other human beings are being heard. So I feel like this is maybe an AI safe job. Hopefully we don't rely on AI for personal relationships going forward. And I also think about Christine also teaches process improvement for us. And I use her phrase quite a bit, which is you are doing process improvement, or your processes may not be defined. They may not be documented. They may not be any good, but you have processes. And I feel like that's the case for change. You may not have defined the change. You may not be managing the change. You may not be any good at the change, but trust me, you're changing. So that is why we are spending time on the change topic today. Just real quick, again, as more people are joining, a reminder that you're being recorded today. What IPD has to offer, I talked about how you can contact us for customized training. We also do these free webinars every month. I also do blogs on our website. I'm currently stuck in the middle which is for middle managers, a series of dilemmas that you face as a middle manager and how to navigate them. Uh, Although we teach non-credit programming, it's pretty rigorous. So there are some graduate credits available through Metro State Institute for some of our trainings. And we have now branched back out into continuing education where individuals sign up to take courses. You don't need your organization to purchase the course. You can, as a group or small group, take a course. We kind of shuttered that during the pandemic and now are circling back. And so we're heading out with leading teams through change. And we'll talk more about it after today's webinar about how you can sign up for that and what it's about. But I can tell you that it is being taught by Christine. And then finally, we have digital badge certificates. So this is, we've gone from paper CEUs, continuing education credits, to sending them to you electronically. And now we also put them for certain achievements, we put them as a digital badge. So you can put them right on your LinkedIn page and demonstrate to people your successes in the workplace. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Christine, you can take over.
Yes. All
Yes.
right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience today. So what are we going to cover today? Beth talked about it being a human thing. Yes, we're going to talk about change. It's one of my favorite topics. Always find it very difficult to do in this amount of time, but I think I've gone over and peeled off the important things. We're going to start by talking about change activators. We'll do a really quick reflection exercise just so you can get an example in your mind. And then we're going to talk about, which is a really important point, the difference between change and transition, which will roll us right into the transition process. We'll have a couple practical strategies, as practical as we can get in a webinar. We'll have some time for Q&A, as Beth said, and then some key takeaways and next steps with which you can move forward with. So with that said, let's go here. So the first thing I wanted to kind of have you think about is this idea that there are a difference between a change and a transition. And the thing we think about is, what is it that triggers all kinds of transitions? Let's think about that. We have change in an organization or in our personal lives, and we want to start thinking about how the change itself, the thing the organization is looking for, is different than all of the transitions that it sparks. So I've put on the screen here a ton of change. Trying to deal with performance, getting information from customers, the pandemic, new processes, new technologies, et cetera. All of these things may be something an organization looks at and says, hey, we have to deal with this, it's happened to us, or we want to plan for this new technology, et cetera. But when that happens, we tend to want to think about how do we implement that change? And when we think about it that way, the part that gets lost often is this idea that, well, yes, but that change, that big change, is going to have all kinds of different impacts on different people. And that's where the human part of change shows up. The good news about that is that there's been a ton of research over decades by really smart people who have figured out how humans go through change. So if we understand what we need for the organization, and we also are a little savvy about how humans go through change, we can bring those things together and do a much better job than we usually do at managing change or leading change through success. So that's kind of the point I wanted to start with, is that there's a difference between the change and the transitions that humans make. So let's start with this reflection. All of you probably were thinking when you registered for this, or maybe you're thinking now, about a major change you've been through in your organization. It could be at home as well, but because we're in a professional setting, I chose to think about a major change in your organization. With the webinar type format, I'm not going to be able to hear about all of your changes, and I'd love to, but I'd like you to sort of think about it yourself and think about, well, how did different people respond to that change in the organization? And What surprised you, if anything, about how that whole process was managed, that implementing of the change? And by the way, how was the change managed? And both in terms of, do you think it was managed well? Did the change reap the benefits or deal with the challenge that the organization needed it to? Um, and also, what was the approach? I want these things kind of going in your mind as we progress here. So now that you've got sort of a major change in your mind, um, let's move forward. The first idea of separating these ideas of organization of the demographical part or the logistical part of a change in the people is because of this point. So here's my assertion that at the end of the day, organizations don't ever change. People within them change. They change their behaviors, they change their attitudes, they change their knowledge, their context. And if that doesn't happen, in fact, nothing changes. So, this idea that we call organizational change is really more about all of the things, all of the culture and the behaviors in an organization. Because if those things don't adjust, then the organization doesn't go anywhere. My proof for this is if you've ever been through an org change where the boxes on the org chart changed and the lines between them changed, but behavior didn't. That's a true organizational change. But if behavior doesn't change, it's just you get the same results. So the idea here is that we want to understand change from these very two different perspectives. The physical changes an organization's trying to make and managing that, and then understanding the idea of how do we how do people transform within and adjust to that changing circumstance in order to get what they and the organization need. So that's where we're starting from. So here's these two pieces. If you want to understand change, at least what I've come to understand, you have to know the difference between the change itself and then also the ripple effect and the resulting transitions, of which there's thousands. So you have the change, the new process, for example, the new technology, um, the loss of a large customer, something from the outside, like a market change. You have those things, and they need to be managed. And those circumstances are what necessitate people to change behavior. And so we're going to separate those from this idea of transition. And so think of transition as this inner process that people go through to come to terms with those changing circumstances. And the reason this is so important is because not every person in an organization or even in a department is affected in the same way. So there's a lot of context around an individual person's transition to deal with those changing circumstances. And that is where we can successfully lead change from. And that's where that human process kicks in. And that also is what transforms people, right? That is what makes it, uh, that's what makes it, allows us to meet our change goals or not, or to adjust even how we measure them. So here's the idea of a change versus transition. Let's look at an example that probably everybody can deal with. New technology, right? That's everywhere. Beth was just talking about AI. So if we're going to put new technology in the organization, think about let's take a particular kind of technology. Let's say we're going to change whatever it is that operationally controls our organization. Maybe that's a customer relationship management system. Maybe that is an HR system, whatever it is that you deal with on an everyday basis, that kind of is the guts of your operation. So when we change that, what impacts to actual people are going to result from that change? Some people will be very affected, right? Those who touch the new system. Some people will be somewhat affected. Some will be hardly affected. And so when we think about that and we go, all right, so how do we identify those points where people's workflow or routine may change? Maybe less technical people start to feel less valuable because so many people now are going to be using this technology. Maybe even, and I have experienced this many times, the go-to people in the organization um, when we were doing things manually or when we used our old system, they may feel like they're losing expertise because of this new system. People's workloads may change. I'm sure you can spin off 100 more of these. The point is that one change, this new piece of technology, has a ripple effect and and has all kinds of transitions that are kicked off for individual people. So again, the change, this circumstance, we use the one of new technology, but I'm sure you've got a different one in your mind. Um, that change itself has to be managed, right? This is where things like our rollout strategy and how are we going to monitor things and our project or program plan or change plan, our communication plan, our milestones, all of those things come to mind, sort of almost project management type things. So then what about the transition part of it? What about what do we do with that inner process that all people go through as they come to terms with these changing circumstances? And that's where we think about this idea of guiding or leading transitions. And that's about helping people make what's sometimes very difficult transitions, sometimes not, um, from the way things are or maybe were to the way things are going to be. That is where we're going to be really talking about today. That's the human part of change and the human part of transition. There's a quote here. I'm going to mention quite a few experts out there in this regard, but there's a quote here that I'll take a moment for you. I'll read it in case some of you are listening and not really watching, but take a moment to look at this. This is by William Bridges, and his quote is, "Transition isn't just a nice way to say change. It's actually the inner process which people come to terms with the change as they let go of the way things used to be and they reorient themselves to the way things are now." And I love that word, reorient. So in an organization, guiding transition means helping people to make the difficult process less painful and disruptive. And it's important to understand that this human process he's talking about is not just for bad change, it's any change. When things are changing, there's a human way that we get through them to come out the other side and actually behave or even find ourselves feeling a bit different. So we call that the transition process. And like any process, it has a beginning and it has an end. And the big question is what happens in between. And I'm sure that many of you have seen a picture that looks something like this, which is the change curve, is what we refer to it a lot as. And it's interesting, I'm going to show you some examples in a moment, that change experts shape the line always in this shape, a downward slope followed by an upward rise. And so the question that I asked myself years ago was, well, what's declining? What is it that is going down and then coming back up? And it's an interesting thought process to say, well, it's, what is it? Is it something in the organization? What is it that's going down? And this is a key point, is this is about individual people. And from a human perspective, what's going down there is productivity. And that doesn't just mean what we get done at work. It's human productivity. And of course, the bottom is time as time marches on. So the idea is that there's some drop in productivity and then that productivity comes back up. And that's kind of the way that all of the experts shape um, the change curve. And I'm sure many of you have come across this before. And if you haven't, that's okay. We're going to go through an example now. But here's some experts. And in fact, these are people I would highly recommend you go find out about. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and anybody who's gone through grieving process has probably come across some of her work. The transition curve, which I just quoted William Bridges. And then you've got Cotter, who is, all over Harvard Business Review and those types of things. And then we have the one we're going to use today in the middle called the transition process. Then we have Jeannie Daniel Duck on the far right, and there's more than these. You can just do a Google on give me the change experts out there, and you're going to get these names probably plus a lot more. But the important thing is they always use a curve. And so I thought it would be a really good use of time today to think about, because this is a human process, what does that curve mean? Like what when we create this curve, what does it do? Like how do we follow it? What does all this mean? And I think you'll find if you had the time and wanted to research each of these, you'd find some incredibly um, common interpretations. So let's start with this. This is what we're going to call the transition process, and it is the model that we use within Beth's organization, and I have used with many organizations and personal coaching things over time. And so, as I mentioned before, it's an emotional journey that humans go through, and the important thing is that we need it. It's not. This is not a problem to be solved. Resistance to change isn't a problem to be solved. It is simply a human reaction to be worked through. And the only way to get to transformation is to work through it. So it is what creates buy-in. So when people talk about creating buy-in to change, this is what they're referring to. What people have to go through to be able to get committed to find their place in, and ultimately maybe even have some accountability for their own behavior in this change. So when we say it's an emotional journey, for those of you that are rolling your eyes right now going, I'm not emotional about work, don't worry. It doesn't mean you have to laugh or cry, but what it means is it's not really logical nor cognitive. There's cognitive pieces to it, but it is what humans go through as they adjust. So that's what we mean by emotional. We're not going to make anybody cry here. So here's how it starts. Now, I know that the word normal is a tough word to use nowadays. I want you to think about it as normal for you, your normal in terms of your routine. And this is kind of where we start. So, and this is just going piece by piece through the transition curve, which is one of our goals here. So, normal routine things going on, ups, downs, but pretty predictable. And then something happens to sort of upset that routine. And in this case, we'll use that example of an announcement of a new technology change. For example, usually there's some part of the change that it disrupts patterns or beliefs or stories we tell ourselves that people question. And a lot of times, some aspect of it's unexpected, and we're sort of unprepared, maybe even a little shocked or stunned. So that change on this curve is where that event happens that I had that slide with all of those examples. That's where that happens, right? Well, it is sort of. It's actually where it happens when that impacts you. So here's an example. Let's say your organization announces a new technology rollout, but it is those other departments, it's in the future. You may go, oh, yeah, yeah, great, fine, and move on. But when some aspect of that event intersects with you, your routine, your hierarchy, your workflow, that is where your transition would begin. We've seen many, many times where the announcement of a change can, in and of itself, spark transition as people worry about it. But sometimes there's a difference in timing. There's often times where someone says, I don't, that's okay. I don't care. And the change is being rolled out, but then some aspect of it that they didn't expect disrupts their world. And that is where their transition happens. So being able to predict where all of these intersections are is quite challenging. But we do know that it isn't at the same time for everyone. And when it does impact, when some aspect of this change, some context does impact people, an individual person, this is where potentially this decline in productivity that we saw, that was that downward slope happens. And this is often where you'll see some blaming, like, I can't believe management's doing this, or constant questioning. This is where pace may get slower at work because people are distracted, some anxiety, uncertainty, maybe even some anger. And it's important at this point to understand that people are unable to hear new information about that change at this point. When they're in decline, they're not going, oh, yeah, I get it. Let's move on. Once they've done that, we're good to go. But people who are in decline often don't want to hear about how good the change is. So after what brings this decline to an end? That's where, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't put that up on the screen before. These are the lists that I went through, this anxiety and uncertainty. And by the way, this happens in positive changes too, right? As people go through promotions, as people retire, as people, enter into personal contracts, they get married, for example, those kinds of things, you can also have this decline. So what happens at some point, we got to move on, right? And this is where we want everyone to get to be able to move on. And so when people can finally start looking forward, when they kind of say, all right, I understand now that things are going to be different. I don't know what they look like yet for me, but I've accepted it, right? We're moving on. Um, and you can tell because people start making decisions based on the current reality versus the way things used to be. It doesn't mean they love it. It doesn't mean they're completely bought in. There's just an acceptance that this is happening. And it usually is something that people will remember the moment they did it. Yep, I kind of realized this is where we're going, and we start moving forward. So this let go is a really key point. And then and it is what ends the decline. And when people let go, let's think about that for a minute. They don't know how this new technology is really going to affect them. For example, the example I keep using is the new technology, but at least they understand, yeah, we're not going back. The old stuff's gone. And this is what we call that final end of the way it was. We stop carrying an image that isn't going to be. The most profound way to explain this is a dramatic way, and that is death, because we talk about every process, or excuse me, every change is a little death of something, right? So when we think about death as in real, actually losing somebody in our lives, we think about it when they're gone, we don't forget them, but we now have a future without them. That future looks different. The more unexpected that death is, the harder it is to get a vision of what that future's like. But we don't forget them. We don't let go of them, but we do let go of a future with them. And so that is the way that we want to think about this, even in a work scenario. And so that's what we're doing to end the decline, is this letting go. Now, once that happens, the good thing is that we can look forward. People can look forward. But now there's this really weird place of, yeah, but what's next? And what does this mean for me? And it can be a really unstable time. The good news is, in an organization, people's minds are open. They want to understand what it means for them. They're looking forward. And this is a wonderful point to get buy-in. This is where people try on different ideas of how this could work for them. We want people to be in this for a bit because it helps them find their place and deal with the impacts to their context within that change. The cool thing about this idea of uncertainty is that we get these sparks of, oh, I think I see it. I see how I see how I fit into this. I see how this will change my job. I can deal with this. So it's this vision of what can be. And that's why you see these little spikes, because sometimes it takes a few of those before we latch onto the real one. And that's why that uncertainty period is kind of up and down. But once we grasp a vision of what can be and it works, we understand it. Now we're moving into, hey, now we can once we understand it, now we can get to renewing. We call it renewal. It's how we make that vision real. And a lot of times, this is things that are provided by the organization around us, like the details of the new technology, the training, the changed processes, etc. And this, ironically, is where a lot of people start teaching change management, and it's past the hard part. If a change is all it requires is a bit of training and some new policies to be rolled out and everybody's on board, that's great. That's easy. We moved through this transition fast. But the transitions that aren't that straightforward, the ones that really do intersect with people in a really challenging way, That's where we need a lot of attention on this transition process before renewal. So we can get to the point where all it is now is about understanding and learning and putting the things into place organizationally. And then eventually, to complete the transition process, we get to vision realized. And we're through. Things are different. And in fact, we have to start to see people who've come through transition differently because they are different. And that, in a very quick nutshell, is kind of the transition curve. Now, what I'd like to do is point out a few important things that get people tripped up a little bit. And it's really important to note that avoiding transition is not the goal. You may say, oh, let's just not worry about all that decline and let go and uncertainty. Let's just not go through that if we can. Well, then you're going to get potentially compliance, but you're not going to get buy-in because people don't find their way through for themselves. So the goal is to move through the transition a bit faster with less unproductive time and stronger renewal, but not to avoid it. Also know that this is a human process. It's been extremely well documented and researched, and you can find a ton of information online about it. But this is a model. In other words, any individual transition can go a bit differently, probably go through the same stages, but at different paces and to different degrees. So some changes require little or no transition, as I mentioned earlier, but the ones that do really require our attention as leaders. So if we can be savvy about this human process and start to look for behavior that tells us where someone is, and help those people move through, we're going to be more effective in our organizational change, and we're going to get to the benefits we needed, or if it wasn't for benefits, if it was to avoid a risk, for example, whatever the change was undertaken to address, we're going to get there faster. So one quick thing that I wanted to point out is most organizations don't go through this as one group. And so I wanted to show you kind of how this works. Though this transition process is meant to be for individuals, if you were to look across your whole organization as this change is rolling out, you could assume that there are many people sort of stuck in the uncertainty, right? And the good news is that they can see unstuck people ahead of them, and it helps them envision their future. And that's good, right? But that's important. The people that have not let go yet can't see the vision at all. Oftentimes, we spend a lot of time trying to convince the people who haven't let go, and it absolutely is wasted time. But what we do know is as people let go and they get into the uncertainty, seeing people further down the curve helps them. All right. I wanted to point out that we do not want to build a bridge. This is our temptation. It manifests itself something like this. Oh, you know what? I know you don't like this change. You think it's going to be bad, but trust me, it's going to be great. Just get on board. And maybe we work together and you trust me. So you go, okay, all right. And you just walk across the bridge, but you never contemplate it. You never question it. You never find your place in it. That is what is called buying compliance and not commitment. So it underscores again that we want people to go through transition. And of course, one of the things we think about when we're really studying this and really trying to practice it as leaders is what does it mean to guide these, and who should do that, and what are we trying to achieve? And those are probably, a lot of these are bigger questions than we can deal with today. But now we know that there is something there that needs guiding, and we understand the difference between a change and the transition people have to make. And our goal is for that more rapid transit with a shallower valley and a better renewal. And there are some things we can do, and we can talk about those for a few minutes here as leaders. And I bet because you've been through a lot of change yourself, you already know what some of these are. So when people are back here and they haven't let go yet, the thing that we can do, it doesn't feel like much, but it's really powerful, is acknowledge that they've lost something and stress that this is reality. So that looks something like, I'm a leader in this organization, and I know you're not liking this change. And I understand it is going to be a big change for you, and it's not going to be fun. Now, leaders don't want to say that, Because if they say that, they feel like they're saying, oh, this was a bad idea, but they're not. Imagine that you have a colleague who is out tomorrow because a loved one passed and they're at a funeral, and they come back in the next day and you know they were out there for that. What's the first thing you say to them? Oftentimes is, I'm sorry for your loss. And that is because that's a balm to people's soul. They acknowledge that I can't do anything about it, but I'm really sorry you're going through that. And that's why it's so powerful, even in organizational change. So we want to acknowledge loss. It doesn't mean that this change is bad. We also want to stress that it is reality, and we want to listen without advising and keep these people close as they start to let go and move into the next phase of their transition, which is the uncertainty. And when people are in an uncertainty, we can change our demeanor a little bit. We can emphasize the present, look for opportunities, help them find their place in that change, and give them time and space to sort of work their way into it and think about how it affects them and trying on different ways to look at it. And then, of course, when they get it, when they think, I see it, I see what this is going to mean for our department, for our team, for me personally, then, of course, we can start to equip them to succeed. This is where the process and the technology and the structures and the training that are going to help them achieve their vision come in. And of course, when people are there, we can celebrate success with them and see them for the transformed person that they actually are. And that's a little bit about what we can do. Now, the question is, how do we do this? Like, what kinds of skills do we need to do this? And we can actually look at that as well. What kind of skills do we need to, all of a sudden, there we go, to do this? Because hopefully you'll see that a lot of this is leadership skills, that the benefit of understanding the transition process about being savvy is just knowing that it exists. And many of the leadership skills you have and that you strive to improve will help you in this curve. The question is when and where. And so when I say we, IPD tends to use, and it's a really great way to do it, Daniel Pink's idea of moving others. And if you're not familiar with Daniel Pink, really easy to get familiar. But these really fit well with the transition curve. So the idea is they help with the transition curve. Daniel Pink's ABCs are attunement, which is, of course, the ability to understand another perspective and align with their emotions and their needs. And then buoyancy, to be able to stay positive and optimistic, even when encountering resistance or setbacks. And then clarity, which is about getting rid of the noise that surrounds change to focus on what matters. And those things, those ABCs, are really helpful in dealing with and when guiding others through change. I'll go a little bit deeper here. While the attunement is the place to start, especially in the beginning of a change. It's really effective as people are in decline and let go, and even early in uncertainty, because it's about empathy. It's about focus on understanding and staying present, maybe asking open-ended questions that allow people to think through this change. And then also, sort of leveling the playing field again, that acknowledging loss, taking away that if I'm the boss and you work for me, so to speak, I can still let go of that and say, hey, this is going to be hard. And I'm here in a partnership with you to help us figure this out. That sort of letting go of power to get power is a really interesting point that Daniel Pink makes. And so this attunement, as you can see by the graphic, is really helpful in those beginning stages. The idea of buoyancy shows up and is really effective in the face of adversity, because that's what resilience is. And in this time, focusing on the present and on progress, encouraging positive self-talk, reframing things that look really challenging into potential opportunities for new skills, for example. This kind of stuff really helps when we're in that period of uncertainty. Isn't as effective, at all effective, actually, back before people have let go. In fact, it just makes them mad. And then finally, in the ABCs, the idea of clarity, which is especially effective towards the end of uncertainty, and then as we go through vision and renewal. And this is about cutting through the noise, helping people understand precisely what's expected of them and how this is going to play out for them, etc. These ABCs, which I've gone very high level over, are examples of skills that we need to use during the transition process to help guide others. And so we integrate those by staying attuned and being buoyant and bringing clarity at the right times as we lead people through the changes that they're going through. Now, what I'd like to do, because, and I'm going to actually go to the Q&A slide here, because I've been on full view and I want to, there we go. I want to make sure that I can see questions, etc. So what I'd like to do is open this up for question and answers. Anybody have, Beth, is there any questions that people have put in the Q&A or in the chat, which I am not seeing, as about what we've talked about here? Maybe people who have had success using the change curve would love to hear from those people.
I'm not seeing any questions or comments yet in either place, but sometimes it takes a little bit to type.
Absolutely.
So I
There we
will
go.
quickly share. I have, of course, seen this change curve and transition many times and have worked with you on customizing it for the leadership at Metro State. And my nugget today, because I tend to be a solution jumper, is I was reminded that when people are still letting go and have not reached uncertainty, um, the uh, I want to give them suggestions for how to like move themselves through the change curve if they don't feel their leadership is helping. And so I'll be like, hey, have you thought about telling your leader that communication would be, hey, have you thought about telling your boss they should send that email and communicate that out? And what you've reminded of me today is that that's not what they're looking for. They are looking for me to just acknowledge their loss and that I should listen without advising. And I always want to hop to the advising. And then I get frustrated when I'm like, they haven't done anything I've suggested and they haven't progressed. And it's like, yes, because they're not ready to progress. So that was a great reminder for me today. So I don't know, I haven't seen any questions or comments come up, but hopefully other people found nuggets such as that. Maybe if you want to throw in the chat something new like me, new but not new that you realized today.
And I'll add on to what you just said, Bess, as we're hopefully going to get something from someone in the group. That's the tricky part of leading through change. And it isn't in addition to any other kind of leadership, but it's about saying, I'm not doing this to make myself feel better. I'm doing this to get people through the transition such that we can move on to getting the benefits from this change that we need. And so you're constantly having to be attuned. And of course, we don't get into it here, but you just reminded me of this. Imagine stakeholders of your change. And of course, we go into this quite in depthly if we in your class, but if you understand who your different stakeholders are, you can start to anticipate what intersections they're going to encounter. And you can get out ahead of this change a little bit, but you do have to keep your eyes open for it. So you're not treating the symptom that you haven't actually seen yet, right? That you're literally going through through it with them. And it's about seeing their progression rather than making yourself feel better, which is what I spent many years doing. Oh, they're nodding their heads, so they must be feeling better about this, right? And then I get in there and realize, no, they're not feeling, they don't understand it, they don't see it, they don't, and they're not going to be able to let go if they're still in that mode. Or, and as you know, Beth, we talk about this a lot, if people do let go and they're like, all right, I may not even agree with this, but I get it. And I see where, I'm in this uncertainty period. We do find, as you know, that if we aren't there to catch them and help them realize that vision, if we're not set up to do that, we lose them. And this is where in the change curve, the exodus comes. So if you have an organization who can't afford to lose people and you're about to go on a large change, this is where it happens. You get them there and then you can't support them. You can't get
Yeah.
to them. So that's the other
And
part.
I think that leads into this question that's in the Q&A.
Yeah.
What are some tips when there are so many disgruntled employees about change? You're not at the manager level, but you want to help.
Oh, it's a great question.
I have a thought, but you go first, and
I'll
then
go
I'll
first,
share
but I'm
what
sure your thought is just as good, if not better. So first of all, it's a great point because leading change doesn't mean you have to have any certain title in your job description, right? You can lead change from a place of not having power because everything we've talked about here is about humans. And so what can you do? Well, you can look for symptoms. Where is this person? Are they only talking about the past? They're so disgruntled. Maybe you have a whole group of them, right? One of the things maybe you can do is just say, this is really hard, and you've lost a lot. I'm sorry about that. Acknowledge what's been lost, but staying firm about, but this is it. This is the reality. This is where we're at, and that helps people potentially let go. Listen without we can sometimes screw this up more than we can help by going, oh, but the new change is great because of X, Y, and Z, and they're not hearing you. So that's one thing you can do. And then when people are in uncertainty, stay close to them and help them figure it out using the things we talked about. Lots of open-ended questions, lots of buoyancy about remaining positive, not in a politically correct, false way, but in a hey, let's what can we do with this? Kind of way. So you can do that without having all the answers. You can lead change without being a manager. Sometimes I think you might be more equipped actually because there's less expectation on you to toe the company line. So if there are a lot of people that can going through this, what can you do to open up channels that appeal to that allow the ABCs to come out? That's what I would focus on.
Yeah, so that's what this, of course, depends on your relationship with I guess, the person who's leading change. But even if it's not the person who introduced the change, it would depend on your relationship with the other managers of those disgruntled employees. But that's where I would use attunement. If if a manager has a bunch of people who are disgruntled and doesn't seem to be using any of the steps to move people through the change curve, then as a fellow manager, I might go to them and say, hey, um, this may seem like a really small thing to you, or maybe not a big deal, or pretty far out in the future, but your talking about this has created a lot of uncertainty for people. And they're waiting for more information, or they're waiting for a new vision, or they're waiting for direction. And so I don't know if you need to talk to individuals or if you need to be communicating more, but I think you want to maybe pay attention. I'm happy to talk through with you some ideas, but I guess I'm gonna make a leap that this person may not be attuned to what's going on with their people. And so cluing them in on the attunement piece, helping them ask questions so that they can figure out what the disgruntledness is
Yeah.
about. But again, there are certain managers of my organization maybe that I wouldn't go say that to. So it's always like a legal situation. It depends, but yeah, there's I think a couple of answers for that. And then there's a question in the chat too. How do you help staff through this process if there's an unknown deadline that's 18 months out? And even management does not know the full outcome as we're not in control of external factors such as the end of a contract. So it sounds like a change has been announced and it's coming, but there aren't any details yet. So what are you doing to help people in that?
Oh,
You
it's a
can't
great
provide
question.
certainty because you don't have certainty, right?
Well, let's think about what we mean by certainty, right? Sometimes I think that we think that people want certainty in dates and times and dollars, and those are important things. But I think what we're talking about in the human side of this is if we don't do this side of it, we're not going to hit the other side. We're not going to hit the milestones. So the first illusion is that we can get through a change without paying attention to the personal stuff. So in answering the question, how do we staff for this? The first thing is I would think more about what can I do with the staff I have to be able to make sure we have the ABCs in place. A first, then B, then C, as an attunement, buoyancy. Where are going to be our opportunities? And I don't know that people will need, oftentimes, they don't need very specific details. They need more about why and how, and as much transparency as you can give. So I would not be worried if I didn't know the outcome. I would start leading the change before that. And a quick example is I've told this example a lot. Beth's heard it before. I was working with an organization, and their leader in IT literally said this to me. And my job was to be help with the human side of the change. He said, Christine, don't worry about it. We told people we're only thinking about outsourcing IT. And I stopped and I was like, well, you just started the transition and you made it worse because no one's going to say, "Oh, you're just thinking about it. I won't worry about it." So at that point, they hadn't made a decision, but at least they could have. First of all, I should have never made that announcement, but they could have at least started to go through the what would they be feeling right now and catch them with the ABCs. So I don't think you should wait until you have tons of detail. I don't think that I don't think you have to. I think you can give enough detail that help people and be transparent because you don't want to make stuff up and you don't want to wait till you have all the details because it's too late. I hope that's a really long-winded answer, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add that the transparency piece is really tricky. So if you go too early with transparency and you don't have enough information, then that creates the panic. And like you said, it's already started you on the transition. So if you haven't given a lot of thought to the change, you're like, oh, I didn't really need to be ready to manage this change because it hasn't started yet. That could get you in trouble. But if you also wait till you have every single piece in place and then you announce change, then you get accused of not being
Yeah.
transparent. So I put the link for the Leading Teams Through Change course that we're offering in the chat. I'm not going to say you'll leave that course with like, I know exactly when to announce change every single time now, but I think you'd have some more insight and information to use. And at least if you misannounce the time of a change, you're too transparent or not transparent, you didn't hit the sweet spot for transparency, you would at least have some tools at your disposal to get things back on track and to, as you say, you don't want to lose your good people during that change. So how do you keep those folks?
In Beth, the underscore for me there of what you just said is that you it this is why when leadership starts to think about a change, they need to think about how they're going to handle people going through transition as much as they're thinking about what the milestones of the project are, because you have all these conversations prior. It's part of the change. I know we're running out of time, Beth, so I'm
Yep.
gonna go to this next steps, and I know you have a couple things here. First of all, what can you do right now? Explore different change curves. Go do that query on Google and look at the different change curves out there. I would say take a pencil and paper and draw a transition you've been through. I was in routine and this is what the change was and this is what happened. And I spent this much time in uncertainty because your shape will look a little different. And then you could look at a change upcoming in your organization and think about what are those things about this change that are going to trigger transitions for people? And then start practicing Daniel Pink's ABCs in any way that you can. And those are things you can do to move forward. And then Beth, I'm going to move into here, and then I'm going to hit my big screen so that you've got this slide here to go through.
All right. I'm not seeing your big screen, but I will start talking anyway. So,
There we go.
uh,
There's a problem.
um, yeah. So, coming up in November, we are offering, like I said, the Leading Teams Through Change as a continuing education course. It's a really great learning experience because we use Grolson, a fictional company, and you will, in those 2 days, get very vested in Grolson, even if you have nothing to do with their industry, because as we said, it's a human thing. And so Grolson's change will probably hit all of the obstacles and challenges that you have, whether you're in government or healthcare or finance. Um, and in Grolson, you have a leader who is leading a change and hoping it. I don't know if the leader hopes it's a magic bullet, but she's hoping it's going to get their company going in a new direction. You have leaders who are cautiously optimistic about the change. You have leaders who are busy protecting their jobs and their positions because things are moving around in their division. And then you have people who just see no good coming from the change and digging in their heels and fighting against it. So, if any of those behaviors sound like what happens in your organization when you're trying to lead change, I think you're going to find this course very helpful. If you have more than one person going, we also have a discount for your organization. So be sure to go take a look, contact us with questions. And if you want to go to the last slide there, Christine. Next month, uh, our Expert Insights, our free webinar, is on the 4 R's of resiliency. And as you can see there, it sounds fabulous. A practical hour to reset and recharge and learn how to reset your mindset, manage pressure, and conserve your energy in the workplace, which after we just got done with this change conversation, I feel like resiliency and change go together, right? Danielle Pink's buoyancy. This is another way to say buoyancy. So this is being conducted by Eric Dormo, who is an instructor with the IPD staff. So if you receive this email today to get the link for Christine's webinar, you'll receive the ad to be able to sign up for the 4 R's of resiliency. So that's what's coming up. We have 1 minute left, so we'll take any final thoughts or questions from the audience. Well, you did a good job, Christine. They're all heading out to manage change.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Beth. And it's always
Yep.
a fun thing to talk about change. I appreciate it. And good luck, everybody.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And like I said, I think you have plenty of ways to know how to get a hold of us if you have additional questions or need additional information. And we'll see you next month for our next webinar. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Bye.